This training has been designed to support community members to build knowledge and skills that will be useful in case of a flood. Flooding is one of the most common, widespread natural disasters in the UK. Since 1998, there's been at least one serious flood every year. Properties in flood zones are more likely to be flooded than destroyed by a fire. 1 in 6 properties in England are at risk of flooding. The Environment Agency and local authorities aim to reduce the risk of flooding by managing land, rivers, coastal ecosystems and flood defences. Together they work towards reducing flooding. However, it is a natural process which can never be completely eliminated. Flooding and other emergencies can have a big and lasting impact on households, businesses, communities and local economies. In worst case scenarios, it causes a risk to life. Community flood plans help communities stay safe, minimise damage and return to normality as quickly as possible, even if an emergency happens. The purpose of this module is to provide an introduction to the processes and terminology associated with flooding. You may already be familiar with some of the issues covered. However, you may find it useful to understand some of the wider terms and processes associated with flooding. Flooding is beneficial for maintaining ecosystems such as wetlands and salt marshes, but flooding becomes a problem when it occurs in areas we live or travel across. Our climate is continually changing. There is historic evidence for this in such things as fossils, which show the world has been much warmer than it is now, and there was little ice on the North Pole. There is also evidence to suggest that at other times the ice cover on planet Earth was much greater than today. Whatever your views on climate change, there is no disputing the fact that extreme weather events are becoming more frequent, making the risk of flooding a very real problem faced by many communities. Climate change is likely to lead to increasingly uncertain weather patterns. We know that the temperature has increased since 1950. There are changes to rainfall patterns. We are seeing more intense rainfall and increased storminess. In the UK, the growing season is lengthening. We're witnessing sea level changes, resulting in higher spring tides, leading the need to upgrade coastal defences. Water is constantly moving around. As the sun heats the water evaporates, rising upwards. It then cools, condenses and forms clouds. Rain then falls onto land. From there it can travel over the ground as surface water runoff, finding its way to small furrows, channels, streams, rivers, lakes and the sea, or in urban areas into drainage systems and sewers, eventually leading to the sea. Some of the rain will be absorbed by the ground. Some will be interrupted by plant roots and transpire back into the atmosphere to start its journey again. The rest of the infiltrated water will percolate down until it reaches the water table, known as groundwater. The groundwater flow recharges streams, rivers, lakes and springs. Does flooding just happen in the winter? No, flooding also happens in the summer as well as the winter. Hard, dry ground can create runoff as much as saturated ground can. To help understand how flooding happens, we need to stay aware of the condition of the land area surrounding your community. This area is known as a catchment. A catchment is an area of land that is drained by a river. All rain that falls into a catchment area eventually ends up in the same river, heading towards the sea if it does not evaporate. This process can take a long time. In the smaller, steep-sided catchments, it is a quicker process that can cause watercourses within the catchment to rise rapidly, whereas the larger, shallower catchments is a slower process, and rivers will react relatively slowly to rainfall at the top of the catchment. There are several sources of flooding. What are the most common sources of flooding that affect your community? Surface water flooding, river flooding, coastal flooding, tidal flooding, sewer flooding, or reservoir flooding. Consider in detail what sources of flooding your community is most at risk from, and think about any actions that may be needed to add to your flood plan. Whilst flooding is a natural process, there are both natural and man-made influences that can affect the likelihood of it happening. Think back to the water cycle we looked at. What factors do you think could affect the flow of water throughout the catchment? There are 4 key themes to consider. The ability of the catchment to absorb water. For example, in an urban area where there is lots of tarmac, water will not be able to soak into the ground, whereas in an area of natural habitat, the ability of the soil to absorb water is much greater. Changes in agricultural practices. The way land is managed on a farm can affect how easy it is for water to soak into the ground. Soil that can be heavily compacted by farm machinery becomes very hard and is difficult for water to be absorbed. Also, if a field has been ploughed so that the furrows run down the hill, this can lead to water being channelled down the hill much more quickly than if a field is ploughed following the contour lines. Blockages. Large structures in the watercourse can lead to water coming out of the bank and causing flooding. You can view a flood map for your area by visiting the gov.uk website and searching flood risk maps. You can use this website to search for flood risk information and mapping for your community. These show flood risk to land from rivers, the sea, reservoirs and surface water. The risk is referred to as high, medium, low and very low, and is shown for both rivers and sea and surface water. High risk means that each year this area has a chance of flooding of 3.3% or greater. Medium risk means that each year this area has a chance of flooding of between 3.3% to 1%. Low risk means that each year this area has a chance of flooding of between 1% and 0.1%. Very low risk means that each year this area has a chance of flooding of less than 0.1%. It's important to remember that the chance of flooding occurring is there at all times, this year, next year and future years, regardless of when flooding last happened. But what is the flood risk? Flood risk refers to the probability and consequences of flooding occurring. Flood risk maps are a tool used to help describe this risk. You can use information on the maps to see which areas are more likely to flood first, deepest or most often. This information is suitable for identifying which parts of counties or towns are at risk or have the most risk. It is also suitable for identifying the approximate extent of flooding and the shallower and deeper areas of flooding. It's reliable for a local area but not suitable for identifying individual properties at risk. The flood risk maps take into account the effect of any flood defences in the area. These defences reduce but do not completely stop the chances of flooding, as they can be overtopped or fail. The dark blue shading areas are highest risk of flooding, lighter blue shading the additional extent of the extreme flood from rivers or the sea. Did you know there are 2 types of warning service available in the southwest of England? There is the Met Office National Severe Weather Warning Service. This issues warnings of rain, snow, wind, fog and ice. And there is also the Environment Agency's Flood Warning Direct Service. This issues alerts and warnings for flooding only. These 2 services interact with each other at the Flood Forecasting Centre based in Exeter. Here, the Environment Agency hydrologists and the Met Office meteorologists discuss the weather forecast and make informed decisions about the impact their weather will have on flooding. So why is it important to keep up to date with weather and flood warnings? It allows us the opportunity to be proactive rather than reactive. It gives us an early heads up as to what is coming and it enables us to prepare and put plans in place. The Met Office Severe Weather Warning Service is designed to warn the public and emergency services of severe or hazardous weather which has the potential to cause damage, widespread disruption, or a danger to life. These warnings are given a colour depending on a combination of both the likelihood of the event happening and the impact the conditions may have. The warnings cover counties rather than specific communities. They sit alongside a detailed overview of the weather expected, along with mapping. Severe weather warnings are available to you in a number of ways, meaning you can always access the latest information wherever you are. This includes on radio, television, the Met Office website, social media, smartphone apps, RSS and via email alerts. You can sign up to the Met Office's severe weather warnings by visiting the Met Office website. You can help by passing these warnings on to family and friends, or by sharing them on Facebook, Twitter, and other social media with your friends and followers. The Environment Agency provides a warning service for flooding from rivers and the sea. They do not cover the source of flooding such as surface water. Flood Warnings Direct is a free service by the Environment Agency that provides flood warnings by phone, text or email. Visit www.gov.uk and search Sign up to flood warnings. When a flood alert is issued, it means flooding is possible. Flood alerts are issued from 2 hours up to 2 days ahead. Flood alerts relate only to flooding from rivers and the sea. When a flood alert is issued, it will mean that flooding is possible and for communities to be prepared. The impact at this stage is normally limited to flooding of low-lying land, roads and gardens. Flood alerts are issued either based on rainfall forecast or from levels being met at one of the Environment Agency's river level gauges. Flood warnings are issued when flooding is expected. Immediate action is required. Flood warnings are issued half an hour to 1 day ahead. Flood warnings only relate to flooding from rivers and the sea. When a flood warning is issued, it will mean that flooding of property is expected and communities should take immediate action. Typical impacts on the ground include the flooding of homes and businesses, major infrastructure, caravan and camping sites and railways. A severe flood warning means there is a danger to life. Severe flood warnings are issued rarely, but when they are, it indicates there is a threat to life. These types of warnings are issued after dialogue with professional partners including the emergency services. Impacts on the ground include deep fast-flowing water, potential or observed collapsed buildings, and communities fully isolated by floodwater. As a flood warden, a flood alert or a flood warning may act as a trigger for you to activate your plan. It may also be activated by a national severe weather warning issued by the Met Office. River levels are also available at all times on the Environment Agency's website. River and sea levels are regularly checked by a network of monitoring stations. These levels can help you understand your flood risk now and in the next few days. To view river levels on the internet, visit www.gov.uk and search river levels online. Then simply enter a river name, postcode, or a place to find your nearest station, or select one from the map on the website. It is important to note that the level shown will only show the information when the level gauge was last interrogated. Do you know who is responsible for managing flood risk in your local area? To understand the role different organisations play in flood risk management, it is useful to understand the difference between main rivers and ordinary watercourses. Main rivers are usually larger streams and rivers, but some of them are smaller watercourses of local significance. An ordinary watercourse is every river, stream, ditch, drain, cut, dike, sluice, sewer other than a public sewer, and passage through which water flows but which does not form part of a main river. The Environment Agency is responsible for managing the risk of flooding from main rivers, reservoirs, estuaries and the sea, as well as being a coastal erosion risk management authority. Lead local flood authorities, often referred to as LLFAs. These are the unitary authority or the county council for the area. Lead local flood authorities are responsible for managing the risk of flooding from surface water, groundwater and ordinary watercourses. They also act as a coastal erosion risk management authority. Internal drainage boards, known as IDBs, have been established in areas of special drainage known as drainage districts. Their functions include the supervision of land drainage, water level management, flood risk management works and regulation on ordinary watercourses. The highways authorities are responsible for providing and managing highway drainage and roadside ditches and ensuring that road projects do not increase flood risk. Water and sewage companies are responsible for managing the risk of flooding from water and foul or combined sewer systems, providing drainage from buildings and yards. So as well as all the organisations that have been mentioned, anyone owning land or property alongside a river or stream or other watercourses, including a culvert, also have certain rights and responsibilities. In legal terms, this person is likely to be a riparian owner, and the rights and responsibilities refer in particular to maintenance, which could affect flood risk. Some of the rights and responsibilities relevant to flood risk are: as the riparian owner, you presume you own the land up to the centre of the watercourse, unless your deeds indicate otherwise. You have the right for water to flow onto or under your land in its natural quantity and quality. And you have the right to protect your land from flooding and erosion with permission from the relevant authority. As the riparian owner, your responsibilities also include accepting flood flow through your land, even if these are caused by inadequate capacity downstream. You have the responsibility to pass on flow without obstruction, pollution or diversion, and you have the responsibility for maintaining the bed and the banks of the watercourse. This is not an exhaustive list of rights and responsibilities. For more information, visit www.gov.uk and search Owning a Watercourse. You should hopefully now understand more about how and why flooding happens, the impact that climate change has on flooding, and the other factors that can influence flooding. You should also have a better understanding of what flood risk is, the different flood and weather warnings, and the roles of different organisations before, during and after a flood. Thank you for taking the time to listen to the Understanding Flood Risk module of the Flood Warning training.